A legend is stepping away. No, it's not Pete Carroll. We'll talk about it on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase over at Game Time. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. My buddy here is Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. You can also hear him Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on the KREF Sports app. And Josh, the biggest story of the early offseason, Nick Saban calling it a career, retiring from the Alabama Crimson Tide. Probably one of the greatest coaches of all time. You got to put him up there in the coaching pantheon of greats over the course of college football history. Easily the best coach of the last 20, 30 years. It's crazy to think that Nick Saban's not going to be patrolling a sideline, especially not at Alabama. What a day. What an incredible day. It's mind-blowing, but I'm also, as a college football fan, just glad that I kind of got to witness the greatness that was Nick Saban, even if at times it was at the expense of the Oklahoma Sooners.
And it was at the expense of the Oklahoma Sooners on occasion. So, but yeah, Nick Saban, look, is he the greatest coach of all time? The hardware says yes, right? The number of national championships, 7, says yes. Distinguishing between eras, that part I think is complicated in any sport. It's never easy to be dynastic, right? And you have to tip your cap to those dynastic runs in sports. And Nick Saban, what he did at Alabama is the greatest dynastic run in college football history. So 6 titles in 12 seasons, and obviously the LSU title to boot as well makes it 7. But the run of dominance at Alabama, it's hard pressed. You can't find anything that beats that. So to me, Nick Saban, yes, is the greatest college football coach of all time. He's the most accomplished college football coach of all time, but I would entertain other arguments. And the reality is, in a way, I would understand or entertain the argument, John, that once you get it rolling, maybe it's easier now than ever before to remain dominant. And the reason I say that, a lot of people will push back because of name, image, likeness, and the transfer portal. And maybe that's true here in the late run of this with Alabama. But because of the advent of recruiting rankings and the amount of talent evaluators that are out there, that not that it's a foolproof science. There's, of course, plenty of misses from, great coaches too. But it's probably a little bit easier, I think, from a talent evaluation standpoint to go if you're at the top of the heap, which Alabama was because of Nick Saban once he got it rolling for a number of years. It's probably easier to go find that collection of 4- and 5-star talent. It's more readily available to you, the amount of information to go recruit the right players. So that part, okay, I would entertain the argument there, but look, this is a bombshell piece of news. I guess we probably should have seen it coming, John, to some degree, right? Because here's a coach that's 72 years of age. He looks great physically and mentally. I mean, he didn't sound tired physically. He appears to be in great shape, but Nick Saban knows better than anybody else what he does or does not have left in the tank, and when it's not the right time to step away. And maybe he wants to step away sort of at the height of his powers, John. But to me, I found this to be surprising bombshell news, even though here's a coach that's 72 years of age and will be 73 next October. I kind of thought he'd keep going for a few more seasons, but obviously now we find ourselves at the end.
Yeah, I just find it surprising because he did look so good, Alabama was still, at the top of their game, obviously playing in the college football playoff this year. But you're right, 72. I mean, the dude's been around forever and racked up 297 wins across 28 years as a head coach. Started his tenure as a head coach at Toledo, went 9-2, then went to Michigan State, helped the Spartans get to bowl games, went 9-2 in 1999, and then went to LSU. Obviously, had the 10-win season in 2001, won the national title in 2003. Spent a little bit of time in the NFL along the way as Bill Belichick's defensive coordinator for Cleveland, had a run with the Miami Dolphins before landing back at Bama, where, I mean, the run of success is as good and it's the best that we've ever seen. There's no other program or coaching tenure that has had the same level of success that he had. 6 national titles in 12 years. It's crazy to think of. And the number of talented players that ran through Tuscaloosa during his tenure was just incredible as well. So, we may not see something like this again, given the way college football is kind of becoming more and more like the NFL, and that it's becoming more balanced. I think we saw that this year with, Texas beating Alabama and Alabama beating Georgia, and, neither SEC powerhouse playing in the national championship game. So, I mean, is it possible? Absolutely. We might see Kirby Smart do something similar if he's able to keep up his run, but I just think it's kind of unlikely as, the game just spreads across the country and more teams are getting more and more talented and finding ways to win. So it would be surprising, but yeah, man, it's been incredible to watch. He's the Bill Belichick of college football. Bill Belichick is the greatest coach in the NFL's history. Nick Saban is the greatest in college football history. It's hard to kind of quantify that, but the national titles are what they are, and he's done something that nobody else has done. And I think along the way, I feel like he managed to do it without kind of irritating everybody. Yeah, you're irritated by the wins, but you watch a guy like Nick Saban and you don't necessarily hate the guy. You just hate the success.
Yeah, no. And the Maria Taylor thing, I mean, it's nobody's perfect. That one wasn't great, right? The dust up, so quit asking, right? The famous moment there. That wasn't great, but that's a head ball coach that probably doesn't like getting interviewed and asked about who's starting this and that and trying to defend a player here or there. So was he perfect with the media? No, not in every circumstance, but look, I generally speaking, don't try to judge coaches entirely on one or two bad instances with the media. In a lot of ways, not at all with how they deal with the media, mostly just on the football merits alone. So Nick Saban, man, is a legend. This radically changes the picture of college football. And there's some real legitimate tectonic plates that we got to figure out here, what it means for Oklahoma. What does it mean for Alabama? First and foremost, I think we need to discuss that. The last thing I would say just about the legacy of Nick Saban, John, is this. Look, the SEC would have, I believe, stood of its own accord, right? Had started winning national championships, in part because of Nick Saban, right, beforehand, but also in conjunction with what Urban Meyer did at Florida, and there was an Auburn title mixed in there, and there was another LSU championship after the Nick Saban title, but the success that Alabama and Nick Saban had, again, the SEC would have stood, I think, of its own accord. And because of the rabid interest of just all of these collective fan bases, Oklahoma stands of its own accord. It's a ratings giant. But I don't think there's much disputing, is there, that a big part of one of the reasons why Oklahoma is going to be handsomely paid, Texas will be handsomely paid, everybody in the SEC will be handsomely paid and has been handsomely paid, is because of the success of Alabama, right? I mean, that is was a ratings draw for years and years and years, because you want to see if big bad Alabama can keep lapping the field, or if somebody's caught up. I think to the kick 6 game versus Auburn. I mean, many of us remember, and we're not Alabama fans, we're not Auburn fans, but you probably remember watching that game because it was Alabama and it was a magical moment. And there's a number of those for Nick Saban and Alabama. So what he's meant on the financial side, again, that's even more difficult to try and quantify. But I do think there's a reality there that Alabama, frankly, got everybody paid.
Very well could quantify that down the road as the Oklahoma Sooners get their first SEC check coming soon. But what could it mean for the Oklahoma Sooners and the college football landscape? We'll discuss that coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. And Game Time is the best place to go get last-minute tickets for your next big event, whether it's basketball, baseball that's coming up. I mean, we're just a few months away from pitchers and catchers, actually a little more than a month away from pitchers and catchers and spring training. So you can go to Game Time if you're looking for those last-minute tickets. I'm looking right now. The Oklahoma City Thunder, they play the Trailblazers on Thursday night. You can get seats as low as $4 to go see that game Thursday night in Oklahoma City. I mean, some great lower level seats also for like $44. Go to Game Time, get those last minute deals. Again, the best place to get last minute tickets and the lowest prices. Go to gametime.co on your browser or go download the Game Time app wherever you get your apps. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase over at Game Time. Again, that's Game Time. Download the app. Best tickets, lowest prices guaranteed over at Game Time. So Nick Saban retires, and obviously athletic directors across the country are sweating bullets. They're doing some mental health checks with their head coaches to see, okay, are we good? Do we have to worry? And I know that there's going to be a handful of teams in particular, maybe Oregon, Clemson, Texas, Washington, Michigan, that could have some concerns on their hands now that Nick Saban's retired. So first of all, just briefly before we get to what it could mean for Oklahoma, what does it mean on the national landscape? Because a big void potentially has been created by Nick Saban stepping down. Now, who they hire could create this situation where they don't miss a beat. But, I mean, Nick Saban's gone. That's kind of a big void in college football now.
Oh, are you kidding me? It's a gigantic void that, the next however many years of the SEC could be determined in no small way by whether or not Alabama gets this hire right. Does Alabama remain the Alabama that they've been? And they're going to get a home run hire. So the first things first, whether it's Dabo Swinney, if it's Dan Lanning, if it's Kalen DeBoer out of Washington, if it's Lane Kiffin out of Ole Miss. I mean, we could keep going after all sorts of different names. Mike Norvell from Florida State. I mean, there's all sorts of names you could throw out there. It will be a home run hire. I don't think there's any doubt. And I expect it to come from the college ranks. I don't think that you go hire an NFL coach or somebody that's perceived as this up-and-coming NFL guy. I think they're going to go with somebody that has college success, maybe ties to Alabama, maybe not, but definitely somebody that is a big-time name in college football, because to me, that's the smart play. Now, is it going to work out? And what does that mean? The musical chairs elsewhere for maybe a program like, again, Clemson or insert other program here, right? So there's a lot of moving parts here on who's going to replace Nick Saban. Will it be successful? And what does that mean elsewhere?
For Oklahoma, this potentially opens the door for you to add some more talent to your roster going into 2024. The 30-day window is open for players to re-enter the transfer portal. Although the transfer portal declaration period is closed, because your head coach is no longer there, you get a chance to, go back into the portal. And if you want to, find a new home. So a guy like Casey Poe, who Oklahoma was very much in the mix for, the offensive lineman in 2024, although he signed to Alabama and could potentially play his college football there, he might reconsider, which puts Oklahoma potentially back on the table. Even though they've got a pretty full offensive line class, they need offensive line talent. You can't throw that away. But, I mean, you might see a number of players making decisions to go elsewhere with Nick Saban gone. I mean, yeah, you commit to programs quote unquote. But really, I mean, the coach matters a large deal to what the identity of the program looks like. Now, again, like you said, Josh, they're going to make a home run hire, but will all those players be fits for whoever they bring in, whether it is a Lanning or a Steve Sarkisian or a Lane Kiffin? And then whichever coach goes, what does that do to that squad? I mean, it's going to create a very, very fascinating domino effect that we weren't going to get at this point in the college football calendar, because most of those coaching hires are done. Those transfer portal declarations are for the most part figured out. And the recruiting class of 2024 is pretty much finalized, except for a few guys who are waiting until the February National Signing Day. So for Oklahoma, I mean, this is a great opportunity to continue to add talent to your roster if you can hit the right notes, find the right keys, and find the right players that you already had some connection with. I think of a guy like Jay Valai, who has connections to Alabama and several Alabama players after being the defensive backs coach there. Todd Bates, Miguel Chavis recruiting the Southeast, a place where Alabama heavily recruits. So I think there's an opportunity here for Oklahoma to capitalize. Will they? Who knows? But they might be able to pick a few spots and add some impressive players.
Well, and if it's Oklahoma, if it's college football in general, the butterfly effect, the dominoes of all of this is just going to be so fascinating. We touched on the coaching angle, and you're right, from a player personnel standpoint, if it's a roster that gets significantly, I don't want to say picked apart or ravaged, but if there's some significant departures, that's going to be fascinating to watch where all of those players wind up and how significant the departures are for Alabama. The other thing I would say for Oklahoma, beyond just strictly a roster construction standpoint, let's hope that there is a talented name or two to add to the equation for Oklahoma, and there very well might be, depending on where all of this goes. The other thing that I look at and say is, until proven otherwise, the SEC got easier for everybody else. It is what it is. They will hire a great coach, but it's tough to follow a legend. Nick Saban we're sitting here talking about he might be the greatest to have ever done it. So there is an immense amount of pressure on whoever comes next. And it's going to be hard to live up to those shoes of Nick Saban. And until proven otherwise, you have to think Alabama got worse out of Nick Saban leaving. So it remains to be seen. Obviously, they could make, and I expect them to make, what will be deemed a home run hire, John. But the idea that they're just going to continue churning and contending for SEC championships and national championships, they might, but this might also take them a minute to find that type of play again for some time. So what does it mean for Oklahoma? It means that, well, it's not quite as daunting going into the SEC because Nick Saban's gone when you walk through that door.
It absolutely is. And even if you hire a guy like Dan Lanning, who's been successful at Oregon, he hasn't won a Pac-12 championship. He didn't make the college football playoff in 2 years, had some really good teams in those 2 years at Oregon, but they failed to beat Washington in 2 attempts. In 2022, I can't remember who they lost to, but they didn't win the Pac-12 title that year either. Didn't even make the Pac-12 championship that season. So yes, Dan Lanning could be a great hire for them, but it's not Nick Saban. Lane Kiffin could be a great hire, but it's not Nick Saban. Steve Sarkisian could be a great hire. And if Steve Sarkisian is the hire, that's very fascinating for Alabama, but also takes Texas down a notch or two. So, I mean, whether it's Kiffin or Sark or Lanning, I mean, it really upsets the apple cart. And you're right. I think it knocks Alabama kind of down a tier. We talked about it, the tier ratings and where we would put Oklahoma in all this. And at this point, it leaves Georgia in a tier of their own. And then Alabama joins that second tier of teams that will be kind of trying to fight and vie for SEC title contention. But it's going to be a big mix-up of group. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out because we don't know. And even if they get a great head coach, like you said, Josh, it might take a minute for these things to all kind of figure themselves out.